For years, you've probably heard that a little bit of sunshine and a balanced diet are all you need for healthy vitamin D levels. What if I told you that up to half the people on this planet don't get nearly enough? And that the standard advice might be leaving your bones, your immune system, and even your brain vulnerable. Welcome to Longevity Lab. I'm Claire.
And I'm Robert. Claire, this one already sounds like it's going to change something I do every day. I have to admit, I thought I had this one covered. I take a walk outside most mornings, I eat a decent amount of fish, and I figured that was enough.
Robert, you just voiced what millions of people believe. And honestly, it is one of the most pervasive health assumptions out there. Today, we are talking about vitamin D, and I want to start by reframing how we even think about it. Most of us call it a vitamin, but biologically, that term is misleading. In your body, vitamin D functions as a steroid hormone. It's a chemical messenger that influences how more than 200 different genes are expressed. Calling it a simple vitamin is like calling a smartphone a calculator.
Okay, a hormone that controls over 200 genes. That is not what my breakfast cereal box told me growing up. I just saw fortified with vitamin D and thought I was doing great. So if it's that powerful, then being low on it must be a bigger deal than I realized.
It's a massive deal, and the data paints a picture that genuinely surprised me when I first dug into the research. A 2021 systematic review published in Frontiers in Nutrition looked at vitamin D status globally. They found that around 50% of the world's population has insufficient vitamin D levels. That is not a small at-risk group. That is half of humanity, and the numbers climb even higher in older adults. A study in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that over 60% of older adults in the United States had inadequate blood levels of vitamin D.
Over 60% of people my age. That's a staggering number. So the common belief that a little sun and a healthy diet covers it for everyone is clearly not matching reality. What's going on? Are we all hiding indoors too much? I always thought our bodies just made vitamin D from sunlight.
Your body does manufacture vitamin D when your skin is exposed to UVB radiation from the sun. And that part is true. But here is the myth-busting detail. The angle of the sun matters enormously. If you live above 37 degrees latitude north, which covers most of Europe, much of North America, and parts of Asia, during the winter months, the sun's UVB rays hit the atmosphere at such a shallow angle that they cannot trigger vitamin D production in your skin. You could stand outside naked for an hour in January in London or New York City, and your body would produce effectively zero vitamin D. Zero.
Wait, zero? I live in a northern climate. In the winter, I still go for walks. I feel the sunlight. You're telling me I'm getting absolutely no vitamin D from that for a chunk of the year. That is honestly a bit of a shock. I've been operating under completely false assumptions for decades.
This is the exact moment I find so many people have when they first learn this. You are not alone, Robert. And it gets even more nuanced. Even in summer, there are other factors blocking synthesis. Air pollution reduces UVB penetration. Having darker skin which contains more melanin is a natural sunscreen that slows vitamin D production. As we age, our skin becomes less efficient at converting sunlight into vitamin D. An older adult produces about 75% less vitamin D from the same sun exposure compared to a young person, and then there is the sunscreen paradox, which is a genuinely tricky one.
Sunscreen paradox. Because we need to protect our skin from cancer, but then we block the UVB that makes vitamin D. So we are caught between two health priorities. That's frustrating. How are we supposed to navigate that?
This is where context matters. Most people apply sunscreen far below the amount used in SPF testing, and they miss patches of skin, Brief, intentional sun exposure on uncovered arms and legs for about 10 to 15 minutes during peak UVB hours before applying sunscreen can support vitamin D production. But this is highly individual. It depends on your skin type, your location, the time of year, the time of day, and this is absolutely a conversation to have with your dermatologist because skin cancer prevention remains critically important. There is no one-size-fits-all prescription.
So, between the latitude, the aging skin, the melanin differences, and the sunscreen dilemma, a lot of us are walking around with low vitamin D and just don't know it. What is actually happening inside the body when vitamin D is low? This is the part I find fascinating because I feel fine. I don't feel deficient in anything.
And here's the finding that surprised me most when I first came across it. Vitamin D deficiency is often silent. You might not feel anything until systems start to struggle. Let me explain the mechanism. Vitamin D, once activated in the liver and kidneys, becomes a hormone called calcitriol. This hormone then binds to vitamin D receptors, which are found in nearly every tissue in your body. Your bones, your immune cells, your heart muscle, your brain tissue. When calcitriol lands on these receptors, it essentially flips a switch that tells your DNA to transcribe specific genes. And one of its best-known jobs is regulating calcium absorption.
So, the calcium connection. This is where I remember the old rickets warnings. No vitamin D, no calcium absorption, children get soft bones. That was the public health message decades ago, and they started fortifying milk.
Exactly. Without adequate vitamin D, your body can only absorb about 10 to 15% of the calcium you eat. With adequate vitamin D, that absorption jumps to 30 to 40%. That is a threefold increase. So even a calcium-rich diet is far less effective if your vitamin D status is low. Over time, your body leaches calcium from your bones to keep blood levels stable, which silently reduces bone density. This is why low vitamin D is strongly linked to osteoporosis and fractures in older adults. A 2019 meta-analysis in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research found that vitamin D supplementation reduced the risk of falls and fractures in older adults, but the effect was dose-dependent. Low doses did not move the needle.
So, taking a tiny amount in a multivitamin, which I've done for years, might be giving me a false sense of security. This is exactly the kind of thing that frustrates me about wellness culture. We get these gestures toward health instead of the real science. Now, what about the immune system? That is the part I hear about constantly, especially in the last few years.
The immune connection is one of the most robust areas of vitamin D research. Vitamin D receptors are present on virtually every immune cell, including T cells, B cells, and macrophages. When calcitriol binds to these cells, it modulates the immune response. It helps the immune system produce antimicrobial peptides like cathelicidin, which are essentially natural antibiotics your body makes to fight off pathogens. A 2022 study published in the BMJ analyzed data from over 300,000 participants and found that people with genetically predicted low vitamin D levels had a significantly higher risk of respiratory infections, including things like the common cold, influenza, and pneumonia.
So it's not that vitamin D boosts the immune system in some vague way. It is actually arming your immune cells with specific molecular weapons. That is a much clearer picture. But then there's the brain connection, which you mentioned right at the top. I've been worried about cognitive decline. It's one of my biggest fears as I get older. Is vitamin D playing a role there too?
A growing body of research suggests a significant role. Vitamin D receptors are concentrated in areas of the brain involved in memory and executive function, particularly the hippocampus. The hormone calcitriol appears to influence the clearance of amyloid plaques, which are associated with Alzheimer's disease. It also reduces neuroinflammation. A 2023 study published in Alzheimer's and Dementia followed over 12,000 older adults for more than a decade, Those with vitamin D deficiency at the start of the study had a 54% higher risk of developing dementia compared to those with sufficient levels. And for people who were severely deficient, the risk was over 200% higher.
54%, 120%. These are not small numbers, and this is something I could have been addressing years ago. That's hard to hear, but at the same time, it's incredibly useful information. It is not too late. So let's get practical. What is the optimal blood level? What should I be aiming for, and how do I get there safely?
In the scientific community, this is actually debated, but there is a converging consensus. The standard reference range typically defines deficiency as below 20 nanograms per milliliter, but many researchers and clinical guidelines, including the Endocrine Society, suggest optimal levels are between 30 and 60 nanograms per milliliter for the full spectrum of health benefits. Under 20 is clearly insufficient. The question of how to get there is where we need to be precise.
Okay, 30 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. I need a blood test to know where I stand, not just guesswork. Then what? Sunlight, food, supplements. Which one actually works?
Let's go through each one with the evidence. Sunlight is the most natural route, but as we discussed, it is unreliable for huge portions of the globe and half the year. When it does work, the amount of time needed varies massively. For a fair-skinned person in midday summer sun at a lower latitude, 10 to 15 minutes on arms and legs might be enough. But that same person in autumn might need an hour or more. It's just not a dependable source for everyone.
And food. I eat salmon. I eat eggs. I thought I was getting plenty. I'm guessing the levels in food are not as high as I assumed.
Food sources are important, but insufficient for most people to correct a deficiency. A serving of wild-caught salmon provides around 600 to 1,000 international units, which is decent. Farm salmon has much less, about a quarter of that. A glass of fortified milk has about 100 to 120 international units. An egg yolk has a mere 40 international units. To reach the levels that research suggests are necessary for optimal health, especially in winter, you would need to eat fatty fish every single day, and most people simply do not. This is where targeted supplementation becomes the evidence-based recommendation for many populations.
So supplements are actually necessary for a lot of us. But I know you said dosing matters, and I've also heard scary stories about taking too much. How much is the right amount, and how much is too much?
This is where the nuance is critical, and why I always say consult with your doctor. For most adults, a daily maintenance dose of 600 to 800 international units is the baseline recommendation from the Institute of Medicine. But many researchers argue this is too low to achieve optimal blood levels above 30 nanograms per milliliter. A 2020 study in the Journal of the Endocrine Society found that 1,000 international units daily is generally safe and effective for achieving sufficiency in most adults. For people who are already deficient, a doctor may prescribe a higher loading dose for a limited time before transitioning to a maintenance dose. The tolerable upper intake level for adults is set at 4,000 international units per day, and consistently exceeding that without medical supervision increases the risk of vitamin D toxicity, which can cause hypercalcemia, too much calcium in the blood, which can damage the kidneys and heart.
So the middle ground, based on what you're saying, is somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 international units daily for most people, after checking with a doctor and ideally after a blood test. That is a much more specific number than the vague advice I followed my whole life. Now, there's one more thing I've heard about, which is whether the form of vitamin D matters. I see vitamin D2 and D3 on shelves. Are they the same?
Excellent question. They are not the same. Vitamin D3 cholecalciferol is the form your skin produces from sunlight and the form found in animal-based foods like fatty fish. Vitamin D2 or cholecalciferol is derived from fungi and yeast. A 2012 meta-analysis in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition compared the two and found that vitamin D3 is significantly more effective at raising and maintaining blood levels of vitamin D over time. D3 increased blood levels by about 75% more than D2. So if you and your doctor decide on supplementation, D3 is the form the evidence supports more strongly.
D3, not D2. Another piece of the puzzle I had wrong. I think if you'd asked me yesterday, I would have said they were interchangeable. So here's another layer. Vitamin D is fat soluble. I've heard you say before that fat soluble vitamins need to be taken with fat to be absorbed properly. Does that apply here?
Absolutely, and this is a practical tip that rarely makes it into common advice. A 2013 study published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics found that taking vitamin D with a meal containing fat increased absorption by 32% compared to taking it on an empty stomach or with a fat-free meal. That's a meaningful difference. So if you take a supplement, take it with your largest meal of the day, or with a meal that includes healthy fats like avocado, olive oil, nuts, or fatty fish. It's a free absorption upgrade just by timing it correctly.
A 32% increase just by taking it with some fat. That is the kind of actionable detail that actually changes outcomes. No expensive protocol, no weird biohack, just eat your supplement with food that contains fat. This is why I love this show. We cut through the noise. Okay, so we've covered the deficiency crisis, the mechanism, the immune and brain connections. I'd love to hear if there's a longevity case study or a blue zone insight tied to all this.
There absolutely is. Think about the traditional lifestyle in the blue zones, the regions where people live the longest, healthiest lives. In places like Ikaria, Greece, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, people spend a great deal of their day outdoors, often working in gardens or walking. They are consistently exposed to sunlight in a gradual daily pattern. They also eat diets rich in small, oily fish that provide vitamin D. But here's the key. They live at latitudes where year-round UVB exposure is sufficient, and they are outdoors during peak daylight hours as a natural part of their lifestyle, not as a scheduled sun exposure session. It is woven into their daily rhythm. For most of us in modern urban northern environments, that pattern is disrupted. We commute in cars, we work indoors, we apply sunscreen immediately. The blue zone insight is not that vitamin D is magic, it's that our modern environment has broken the natural cycle that our biology evolved with, and we need to consciously compensate for that.
The environment mismatch. That's a theme we've hit before in this show. Our biology was built for one world, and we are living in another. So the intentional compensation is the supplementation. I want to shift to our regular feature now. If you are finding this valuable, if you want to understand the real science behind the health claims you hear every day, please subscribe to Longevity Lab. We release a new episode every single day, and we are on a mission to help you separate the evidence from the hype. It genuinely helps us reach more people who are tired of confusing health advice. Now, Claire, I want you to give me today's rule. What is the one takeaway I should walk out of here with?
Today's rule. If you live in a northern climate, spend most of your day indoors, or are over the age of 60, consider asking your doctor for a vitamin D blood test. And if your levels are low or even borderline, a daily D3 supplement of 100 to 2,000 international units, taken with a fat-containing meal, is an evidence-based starting point to discuss with them. This simple, low-cost step could be one of the most impactful moves you make for your long-term immunity, bone strength, and brain health. Do not assume a little sun is enough.
That rule hits home. I am over 60, I live in a northern latitude, and I spend my mornings indoors. I have my annual physical coming up in 2 weeks, and I am going to ask for a vitamin D test specifically. I've never done that before, and based on the result, I am going to have a real conversation with my doctor about the right D3 dose for me, taken with my evening meal, which always has olive oil. This is how episodes become real changes. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Robert. That is the whole point of this show, knowledge that turns into action. And as always, while the research is clear on the broad patterns, your individual needs are unique. Vitamin D status is influenced by your genetics, your health conditions, your medications, and your lifestyle. So the conversation with your healthcare provider is not a formality. It is the key step that makes the science personal and safe for you. We will be back tomorrow with another episode of Longevity Lab. Until then, question the assumptions.
Especially the ones you've held for decades. See you next time.